My name is Pamela Hartling. I'm a social worker at Northwood Care Incorporated in Halifax, downtown. I've been a social worker here for almost 27 years, and it is a profession that I love and would really like to impart to other students in any way that I can be of help to them. One of the things that comes to mind when I think of being a preceptor for a student is imparting some of that enthusiasm and love to that student, and helping them to understand how their profession affects their whole life. It's not just a place to come to work, it's a place where it's very much a part of your life. And the learning goals that need to accompany that are very much attitude as much as academics. And if I were having a student come here, I think one of the things that I would look for most would be that that student is coming with an attitude of learning, an attitude of wanting to know and wanting to integrate knowledge in that learning process.
And I'm John O'Keefe, and I as well am a social worker here at Northwood, which is a long-term care community, and we have 474 people living here, and we have the privilege of providing preceptorships to a lot of students. And what I've learned over the years is that it's very important for students to be clear about what their learning goals are. They need to be very precise in terms of what they're trying to achieve. It's helpful for us in relation to our ability to provide feedback if their goals are not only achievable, but they're measurable in nature. That makes it easier for us to evaluate them as well. Also, as Pamela said, one of the things that is really adding value to the student experience is when we can impart to them the love that we have of the profession, and students really challenge us as clinicians to be able to remain current in terms of best practice and evidence. They're always challenging us in our way of practicing and the interventions that we provide. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship when students are in the field.
I think as a preceptor, part of my role would be to make sure that the student isn't overwhelmed, because this is a huge place, it's a huge organization, and on a daily basis we deal with life and death situations, which isn't an easy thing to learn to deal with, and can be very difficult for a student who isn't used to perhaps seeing this as part of daily life. And my role as a preceptor, I would think, would be to gauge where the student is with this sort of situation, how it's affecting them emotionally. So I think perhaps a little bit of speaking to the student about how they're feeling about the situation is important, because sometimes things can really hit you in the face, because it's easy to become personal when perhaps an older person is dying and they may remind you of a relative or something like that. That could hit a student very hard. So I think, again, part of my role would be to gauge how the student is on that sort of thing.
In my experience, it's very important to make yourself available as the preceptor to the student, and if I would suggest anything to prospective preceptors, I would dedicate time for an actual preceptor-student exchange on a weekly basis and make sure that that's protected time, because it's easy in our environment to get distracted, to take on other priorities and to set that aside. But that's very damaging to the learning goals of the student, because the worst thing that could happen is that at some point in time in the placement that there be surprises, that the student not be prepared to accept the fact that there are areas where there's weaknesses that they have to try to continue to grow and develop around. And the only way to keep the student apprised of their strengths and their areas where they need to work on is to continue to give them feedback and I found from my experience that you need really to set aside time to have that opportunity to talk to students, and you model what you hope for them to be able to develop in terms of skills. So it's very important, if you've got a clinical practice, to include them in terms of observation. If there are certain skills that they're trying to develop, try to create the opportunity for them to see you as an experienced professional demonstrate that skill, and then ask them to try to copy it using their own style.
I think also, John mentioned the word students' interests. I think it's important to, there's so many opportunities here to maybe hone into what the actual interests of the student are and to play on that a little bit.
I think you need to be flexible, because sometimes students will come in with a learning contract that has very lofty ambitions attached to it. Early on in the placement, you may need to relook at that and come up with some other strategies to try to help the student attain that goal, or you may need to switch foci as you go along. And as long as the students understand that there may need to be some modifications made, and there's agreement between the student and the preceptor to do that, that should be able to happen without too much difficulty.